Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Setter Tales podcast. I'm Wade. This was going to be the continuation, part two of the interview we were doing with Ian Donovan, the United States Army, and some of the training aspects that he's been talking about with the military dogs. And for part two, we're going to kind of make the transition into some of the hunting dog applications for some of these same kind of behavioral situations. And so we welcome back Ian.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Hey, as we said, Ian, we were talking about a lot of the transference of the things you guys do with the military dogs over to our side of the aisle and the hunting dog, upland dog side. Obviously, you have dogs of your own that you hunt with when you're not at work. And so we could kind of talk about some of those similarities, and we can go through that. And but as a place to start, a lot of people have questions about how to select a puppy. They're going to go get that puppy for the first time, and let's just kind of start there and get your feelings on what to look for.
Sure. Yeah, man. Puppy selection is paramount. Obviously, you want to start with a good product. And what I always do to ensure that I'm getting what I'm kind of the type of dog that I'm looking for is it comes from the parents, right? It comes from the grandparents. So if that dog, his parents have been hunted, and especially if the bitch has been hunted during last trimester of her pregnancy, that's pretty huge for the development of puppies inside of a dog. I've seen some pretty good results with that. And it's something that I learned from obviously the mom dog side of things too. They work the bitch last trimester of her pregnancy, and somehow some of that gets passed along to some of the puppies that are inside of her because there's certain things that are going on in the developmental stage of the puppies inside of her at that point where they can start keying in on some of the things that the female dog is doing. So that's pretty big, and how the guy is hunted, the parents of the dog, whether it's field trial or just gun hunts. I'm not a big field trialer guy when it comes to upland bird dogs. I like to hunt with them. I do field trial a Labrador and HRC, but that's just because it's something I enjoy doing. He'll still hunt if I take him out to hunt. And that's always been more important to me than any success in a field trial application is the dog's ability to hunt with me because I enjoy hunting more than I enjoy field trial. So I guess it's a little selfish on my part, but the dogs don't understand the difference, so it works out. But yeah, make sure that those parents hunt. Make sure that they're good hunting dogs. The confirmation of the parents is pretty important. It's something that you need to be aware of. Obviously, the health of the parents is something that's pretty important. So make sure that you're getting it from a reputable breeder. Confirmation of the adult dogs is within standard. And then a lot of the selection criteria when it comes to puppies is very similar. There are certain tests that we do with dogs in Europe that kind of carry over to some of the tests that I do with a puppy litter or litter of puppies when I'm looking for a new gun dog. I want an independent dog. I'm looking for independence, sociable, good conformation, obviously, and then I'll start putting him through tests. I'll look at how he interacts with his litter mates. Is he constantly winning wrestling matches, or is he constantly the one on his back giving up? Right? I need a dog that's interested in winning. I need a dog that's more interested in following humans around than following his litter mates around. I don't want the dog that's in the corner by himself, not interested in anything that's going on. And then I'll pull out, a rag and I'll start playing with the puppies. Who's the first dog to notice that the rag comes out when I'm moving it around? Who's the first dog to use his eyes to see what's going on in his environment? Who's the dog with his nose on the ground the whole time? These things are pretty important to me when I'm selecting, and the reason why is because the puppy will show you a lot. When you're in that selection process, and the selection criteria is what you make it. But again, I just try to look for some of the independence, sociability. I need the dog to be independent, but also need him to work with me, right? And so if he's constantly following his litter mates around as opposed to coming and checking me out, or just off on his own, doing his own thing and not interested in me whatsoever, I'd like the dog that's a little more interested in me, very interested in the toy that I bring to the table. When I give him the toy, give him access to it, does he absolutely hammer it and grab it and play with it? Because that's what I like. I like high prey drive in a young dog, because that is kind of the catalyst to things that we can work on in the future with that puppy. and then possessive. I'd like him to be pretty possessive of something in his mouth, because that to me would probably be a dog that would be easier to force fetch or to train retrieve. To kind of do some of those things with. He's apt to take things in his mouth and carry them around. And is he constantly winning? Again, not only wrestling matches, but tug of war with his litter mates. Is he the one who gives up when he can't get the toy? Or is he the last one who all the other puppies give up and he wins? So these are some of the things I'm looking for in puppies. And once I find that, I can determine, I can pretty much weed out, what I'm not looking for, separate those puppies from the equation, and just until I have the strongest puppies or the strongest puppy in the little pen with me. And that's kind of how I go about selecting a dog. In Europe, they'll do things like, they'll put the dog in some cold water, a few puppies. The first dog to get out, find his way out, is a dog that we may do something with. He shows resilience, he shows some intelligence, and the will to survive. Some of the dogs will just freeze up, and that's not a puppy that you want to really do much with. The white mouse test, white mice, they'll introduce white mice to the puppies, and some of the dogs will play with them. Some of the dogs will cower in the corner, and some of the dogs will kill it and consume it, right? Carry it around like it's its prize. Well, those are the dogs that make it to do what we need them to do. But selection criteria is very important in puppies, and you really need to know what you want out of a dog prior to getting the dog. That's huge to training dogs in general.
So somebody that's hunting birds, for instance, in Iowa, hunting pheasants, is there any difference between a female and a male, or do you have a preference?
Well, what I've found with females and males is I think females are a little more intelligent. I think that they obviously sometimes work a little better with other dogs. You get a real alpha male out there that's not exposed to other dogs at a young age, and he hasn't been properly socialized. You may have some aggression issues, which is sometimes what I've found. Or you may have a dog that's less apt to want to honor another dog. Males kind of tend to rely on testosterone to get them through things. They'll run through brick walls. They'll abuse their bodies at a much higher rate than female dogs will. I think that's just the way that they're designed. They're designed to protect, the pack, to be the alpha of the pack, and females are designed to last so that they can create more puppies to add to the pack, right? So those are kind of some of the differences that I've noticed with males and females. I do enjoy working with male dogs and hunting them because if I have a dog, I'm not going to neuter them or spay them unless there are health reasons to do so, because the work that goes into a dog that I have is something that I'd like to probably benefit from in the long run. So I'll breed most of my dogs. And sometimes, if that female dog comes in a heat during hunting season, peak of hunting season, that can be an issue. So that's some of the reasons why I tend to stay away from females as opposed to males. But females are also really, really intelligent dogs that kind of find smarter ways to solve problems, whereas males will kind of bulldoze their way through things. So not a real big difference, but there are some differences in them and why I may transition to one over the other.
So if you're looking at that puppy of English setters, for instance, and as a prospective client, somebody that's going to take this puppy on for 10 to 12 years, are you looking for the same kind of things that you mentioned on the military side, or some of those things are consistent, I assume, as far as the intelligence and how outgoing the dog is or one puppy is compared to the other?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I said, people or dogs are pretty similar in that aspect. You have a blank slate, but you have what's in their DNA, right? And they're not all the same at birth. They're very different personalities already, and a lot of that has to do with the way that they were raised in that litter. A lot of times runts, the run of the litter gets kind of looked over, but most of the time there are some pretty good hunting dogs. They've got to adapt to being smaller as a result of whatever may happen to them in the litter to survive. So they're pretty adaptive. They problem solve pretty easily, and they really don't give up because they can't afford to, right? But yeah, I mean, that blank slate that you're starting off with has got to be what you want, what you like. And I kind of explained to you the type of dogs that I like, but some people would rather the dog that gives up a little easier. It may be a little easier to train for them. But in my opinion, I like a very drivey dog, a dog that's got all of the intellect and the intelligence and the drive that I can get out of that litter. and then from there I can kind of make it what I'd like him to be. Um, and then once we make that selection, we start training day one. You the earlier the better. And again, just like we do with the military dogs, one of the first things that we do throughout the dog's first 2 years is environmental training. Successful exposure to different environmental factors in his environment. The most environmentally sound dog is going to be set up for success. He may have less of a brain than a better dog, but if that other dog it doesn't have the environmental training that weaker dog does, that dog with the higher environmentals is going to make a better hunting dog, a better gun dog for you. Right? I've seen phenomenal dogs with phenomenal noses that are gun shy. You know, what are you going to do? Just because you've skipped steps in the training process, you've really hampered that dog's ability to shine and to progress through programs. Um, Dogs that get sick in dog boxes, in the back of the truck. Well, you've got to expose dogs to moving objects, things that they're unfamiliar with from a very young age, and that kind of is indicative of someone who didn't do that. Dogs that don't want to go in water because maybe their first interaction with water was freezing cold water, because people don't understand that these dogs need to, through successive approximation, which is another term you'll hear me say a lot, just baby stepping a dog through things. Um, the biggest thing that I see with gun dogs that we need to talk about right off the bat is gunfire neutralization. And it's what we do with our military dogs as well. And we always expose a dog to new things by pairing it with something that's positive, right? So even if the puppy doesn't have any drive for a toy yet because he's brand new, but what he does have drive for is food, right? It's what he knows is good in life. That's pretty much all he knows is good in life. Food and the warmth of the litter mates and the mother, right? So I utilize food quite a bit in the early stages, and I will. Again, the way I feed the puppies is periodically throughout the day, small portions, because it gives me more access to training opportunities. So I'll feed him more often throughout the day to give me more opportunities to train him. And I'll just start with clapping my hands. It could be snapping my fingers, something as simple as snapping your fingers next to the ear of a little puppy while you're feeding him. And then that progresses to clapping my hands around the puppy while I'm feeding him. I progress to banging food bowls, and then progress to shooting a 22 cap gun at a distance, and then working my way up. But it's always, always, always paired with something positive. And for puppies, for the most part, that's food. For these older dogs that we have, it's normally a toy. So anytime we're playing with a toy, loud noises are happening at a distance first, and then we kind of work them into it. Um, it's easier for me to work the gun closer to the dog than to work the dog closer to the gun if I have a person helping me. But then again, if I have a guy shooting a gun for me, I can work that dog closer to him because I'm going off of what the dog's telling me behavior wise. When the dog starts paying more attention to the gun than he does to the food or the reward or the toy, back it up a little bit. I want that dog to be completely ignorant of the fact that there's even gunfire going on. He hears it, but it's not important to him. And then we start with these young dogs. After we're kind of to a point where we can he's understanding that loud noises are a good thing. He's not cowering. He actually starts wagging his tail, when he starts hearing loud noises. I'll start preceding feeding times with loud noises. So he's heard it during feeding times. Now I'm going to make a loud noise and it's going to produce food. Okay. So now we're telling him that loud noises make good things happen. Okay. And that's going to be very important in the field, obviously. The good thing's already going to have happened for him in the field. But we need a dog that's very sound with loud noises and gunfire. Obviously, if his job is going to be around gunfire at all times. And then after gunfire, and kind of at the same time, I'm getting him high up on things. I'm getting him down low, getting him into cover. One of my favorite drills to do with puppies is withholding food from them for a couple of those feedings once they're a little older. So now they're hungry. And then I'll take little bits of kibble and I'll put it into grass, right? So they have to use and this is just grass in the yard. And then that'll progress into taller grass. And then I'm hucking handfuls of food into briar bushes. And these dogs are jumping into briar bushes to get the food. It's a game to them to get a reward for jumping into this stuff. And they're desensitizing themselves to what they're feeling. And in a lot of instances, they're pairing that feeling with something good. So tricking their brain into understanding that jumping in a briar bush and hunting in a briar bush with your nose is a good thing. It results in food, right? And that's going to carry on when we start introducing birds in cover. That dog's not going to be shy to jump into cover and go and find a bird, to use his nose when he's in cover. So a lot of things in the beginning that we start doing with these dogs are the same things we do with these military dogs. But now instead of a ball, it's a pigeon or it's a wing initially and then a pigeon. Um, and then the way we expose them to pigeons is a big deal as well. It's kind of similar to the way that we expose these military dogs to shooting. I'm shooting now, the dog's tethered to me. I'm shooting a pistol or a rifle. It's kind of the progression with these puppies when it goes from maybe a wing that you're playing with them with. You want them to be interested in it. You want to find it with his eyes, obviously, but you want to start very, very quickly transitioning to him finding it with his nose as well. And there are a couple drills that I do to turn the dog's nose on as opposed to him just using his eyes. Those are pretty important, and it goes back to the box method that I talked about with the military dogs. So I'll have a wing in a box that the dog can't access. The second he goes to it and smells it, and you need to be able to understand his change of behavior. See that tail wagging, boom, he gets a little piece of food, right? Because he already knows food means a good thing. And then very quickly, I've got a little springboard, and that's something, again, that you've got to expose that dog to properly at a distance, setting it all to understand that it's going to make a noise, it's going to throw an object. It's nothing he's got to be scared of. But now when he reacts to that odor of a bird wing, it shoots up in the air. That ties back to prey drive, right? Anything that he sees in his environment, he wants to go after and put his mouth on. He's very interested in it. So now, once he smells something and he reacts to it, it could be a very minute reaction in the beginning, and it's got to be in the beginning because that's all you're going to get. Again, through successive approximation, you start building what that reaction looks like. And still, you start building it into a point. And the big thing is now you're having a little puppy who's learning that odor without seeing anything, just odor produces good things, right? And then pointing, once you smell something, produces a good thing. And then we start baby stepping them towards a pigeon. But these are all very important steps that you need to take with a young gun dog. Especially, crate training is huge as well. Little things like wearing a collar at all times. I expose them to the prongs of an e-collar at 8 weeks old. And that's little tiny prongs that we use on tiny toy chihuahuas and little dogs that we train. I'll just put on the underside of a flat collar. It doesn't have a remote on it, but there are prongs on it. And he learns to just be desensitized to this sensation on his neck from a very young age. And it sets him up for success later on in training down the road.
So what's the biggest problem you see that your average, hunter dog trainer, the guy who's got the puppy, and he's not a professional trainer, he's going to try to do it on his own. Where do they make their misstep? Is it trying to move too fast before the dog's ready? They kind of get impatient and don't give enough time on the foundational things before they move. And I guess one of the questions would be, how do you know when that dog is ready to go to the next level? We talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
You and I have before, but what would you say to that?
Well, I'll start this off by saying that it is very common, and don't beat yourself up if you are one of these guys that has done this, because you have a full-time job at home. Training a dog is not your job. So you get home from your day job, got a few hours to spend with a dog, and understand that you're going to want things to go and progress a little quicker than they will, right? So taking your time is paramount. Being able to read a dog is huge, because as I've kind of alluded to with different dogs, you can progress a little differently. But if you're unable to understand what that means with your certain dog, there's taking more time is always going to be better than taking less time during training, right? And not with each training iteration. That's not what I mean. Short training iterations are what you want, but when it comes to a certain subject that you're training the dog on, taking more time for him to get it is always going to be better than taking less time, rushing the process.
And I had a situation with a setter, as you know, and we'll talk a little bit about this, because different breeds of hunting dogs have different kind of degrees of, I guess I'll call it, sensitivity to training. Some dogs, some breeds are able to take more pressure than others. Um, my experience with English setters has been that they're a little softer in their temperament. So typically with them, it would take a little longer. You would expect it to take a little longer because your training sessions are probably going to be a little shorter, and so then maybe with a different type of breed dog.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Breed specifics are big, but then again, if you select that hard charger in the litter out of a quality litter, you're probably going to deal with that less than you would as if you made a poor selection in the litter. Every dog, regardless of breed, is going to be unique in his own way. Um, it's something you really have to keep an eye out on. But the biggest mistakes that guys will make is rushing things and then not exposing the dog properly to different environmental factors. If I took a young dog and only spent a year working on one thing with him, it would be environmentals, 100%. You know, and that's gonna create a foundation that's bulletproof for that dog. You know, he's gonna be able to ride in a truck, in a box, and in a boat. You know, it's big. It's big for dogs.
And being exposed to people and crowds and just
Yeah,
noises and just that kind of thing.
other dogs, big people, little people, children are weird for dogs, especially adult dogs who have only lived with adults their whole lives and didn't have any exposure with children. Noises, smells, different temperatures, different surfaces, everything, man. Expose that dog to things that, even if it's strange for you, it's not going to be strange. It's weird for you to think that the dog should be exposed to it, expose them to it. Anthropomorphism is the ability of the human being to think that dogs think the way that humans do. That's nothing further from the truth. So just because you don't understand why the dog's having issues with it, because you wouldn't have issues with it, train the dog the way you think the dog thinks about things, not the way that you think about things. That's another big training tip that I could give guys.
And then the other thing is sometimes when you're thinking you're making progress. I know I've experienced this. You have that day where just everything went great yesterday, but now the dog seems like he forgot everything that he was doing yesterday, and now you're like, what do I do? What happened? What the heck is going on here? And, but part of that might be that you just need to kind of fall back and on that last step and make sure that's a little firmer before you kind of proceed. You just got to kind of start over a little bit, but not get not get so frustrated that you throw in the towel for the whole thing. But my experience has been that's probably going to happen at some point along the way. You're going to have that day that just you seem like everything you've been working towards for 6 months has just gone out the door, and the dog has just totally lost it. But I guess that's this part of it.
That's part of it, and that's something that sometimes you experience with a dog that's 10 years old. That is part of it. What I would suggest for individuals that are getting into training their own dogs is a couple of different things. One, have a clear and concise plan prior to pulling that dog out of a crate or a kennel when you go to work with them. Have a plan to what it's going to look like when you're training this dog, and have a clear definition of what you expect out of that dog to finish the training session. Okay. Once you get there, regardless of if it took 30 seconds or 10 minutes, put the dog away. Let him think about that. Always end on a win. The dog's got to be successful. And once he's successful, praise him and put him away. Okay. He's going to go back in that kennel or crate. He's going to think about what just happened to him. And as long as it's a good experience, that's gonna really grow into the next training session that you have with that dog. Another thing is understand what you want every command to look like prior to teaching the dog the command. Law of primacy. What the dog learns first is going to stick. It's what he's going to revert back to. So if I teach the dog the come command and he comes in the general vicinity of me for a couple seconds and then runs away, is that what I expect out of the dog in the come command? No. For me, come means come, sit right in front of me and look at me and give me your undivided attention until I give you another task. That's what I want. And through successive approximation or baby stepping, right, you can get there with a young dog very easily. The second he comes to you, boom, he gets rewarded. He understands that coming to you gets him a reward, and then you start having him come to you and sit. then he gets a reward. Have him come, sit, look at you, hold his attention. Having a marker of some sort is good, and that's a whole other discussion that we could have, marker training. Um, but that's, build those baby steps into what you want and then solidify it. Once you have what you have, that's what you accept. Once he understands what the command means, that's what you accept, and only that, before you move on to anything else. And understand what you want it to look like, what you want every command to look like when you before you even start teaching it to the dog. It's very important, because if you start tweaking what you want it to look like after the dog's already learned, the first thing that you've taught him, you're going to just prolong how long it takes that dog to get a good understanding of what you want out of him, because you didn't have a good understanding of what you wanted out of him. So you need to understand what you want out of this dog, and then understand the best way to get there during a training session. Think about it, take the dog out, implement that, and then put him away. If you're getting frustrated at all during any training session, whether it's, treat the dog, get him to end on a win, and then go ahead and put him up. You can do a lot of damage with a young dog, especially, without even knowing it, just because you may have had a bad day at work, you got an argument with the wife, or things aren't going your way that day. I probably wouldn't even go and mess with my dog at that point, not until I'm in a better state of mind to go ahead and give that dog everything that he deserves, and everything that we can do positive.
So when you're initially training that dog, and it does what you're wanting it to do, your picture in your mind, I want the dog to come, and I want the dog to, sit in front of me, or whatever it is, then that reward can be as simple as a praise and a pet on the head, or a piece of kibble, depending on the dog, or both, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's that reward that you're kind of, are there other ways to reward the dog, depending on the dog itself, or not?
Sure. Yeah. Some dogs have no inclination to eat, after they've had a food anyway. And early on, before the dog has any prey drive, I use food quite a bit, and I withhold food, and I will feed him his daily portion of food throughout training sessions. So he's always hungry. It's always a good reward for him. But a dog who's full is not a dog who's motivated by food anymore, right? So a lot of times we do use toys, but that's something you have to create drive in the dog for, as a toy. But once you have a dog that's got high toy drive, you can definitely use that in training. It's a great tool to use in training. The dog's got to understand. You can treat a dog. Some dogs get more out of praise. Some dogs get more out of verbal praise, pitch, tone, and inflection in your voice, which is what dogs understand and respond to, or physical praise, petting the dog, rubbing the dog. A lot of times in the military, we have dogs with such high possessive issues, and it's such a fight to get a toy back from them, that in training we just use treats, because it disappears. Boom, the dog he does what I need him to do. He gets rewarded with a treat. That reward, disappears once he's consumed it. So now there's no fight, and we can move on to the next thing we're trying to do. But yeah, toy rewards are big. Verbal praise, physical praise.
Now, what if you don't get that reaction, or what you're looking for whatever reason? If that dog doesn't come to you and sit, and obviously the dog doesn't quite understand what you want it to do yet, but how do you handle that? Is there a correction that you do, or do you have to be careful about that as well?
Well, you got to be careful. I never, and this is a lesson that my friend Pat Nolan taught me. He's one of the most patient men I've ever met, and he's done more to coach me as a father and a husband than I think he has a dog guy. But you never discipline for misunderstanding, right? If the dog misunderstands you, you never discipline for that. You only discipline for disobedience. And disobedience happens when the dog understands what you're asking him and chooses to do what he wants to do instead. I never take anything personal either in dog training. So if a dog is failing, it's my fault, right? If a dog blows me off, I don't get upset. I don't get angry. I work with that dog as a result of what he's doing. Again, if he's unclear as to the objective as to what I'm asking him to do, then that's my fault as a trainer for making it unclear. I need to be clear and concise in my guidance to this dog. Part of that is, like I said, understanding myself, the end result of what I want to see out of the dog. And then as a trainer, relaying that to the dog. You've got to be clear and concise in your guidance. A lot of that is through body language, through mood, through temperament, through your voice, the way that you speak. Less words are better than a lot of words. Pitch, tone, and inflection of your voice. High pitched praise voices are a good thing for dogs. Low guttural, angry voices, the dog picks up on all these things, right? There's a time and a place for everything. The dog needs to understand if there is a toy involved or if there is a task, right? Especially with a toy or for these bird dogs, a pigeon. I use pigeons quite a bit. I'm fortunate enough to have homing pigeons and have access to them. But the dog needs to understand that the reward is something that I want him to achieve. I want him to have this reward. I need them to understand that I'm going to help him to get that reward. So I know you want this pigeon. I know you want this ball. Here's what I need you to do in order to get this pigeon or get this ball. And once the dog understands that you are a catalyst to his reward instead of a hindrance, you've got something. You've got something to work with. But that takes you understanding how to make the dog understand that as the trainer. If you're constantly impeding his access to good things, he's just going to start looking at you as a hindrance. If you're constantly the guy who's frustrated with him and yelling at him and correcting him, I wouldn't want to be around you either if you're doing that to me. Be positive, be firm but fair. Dogs understand that saying more than anything. Firm but fair. If you're disobedient, I know that you know what I want you to do, but you're choosing not to do it, I'll be firm. But I'll also be fair. If you misunderstood something that I asked you to do, I'm not going to correct you for it. I'm going to do a better job at getting you to understand what it is I'm asking you to do. So it takes a ton of patience and a ton of being able to read your dog.
So what are some examples of that might happen in the field? Say that the dog just didn't understand something you asked it to do, or the dog's just being disobedient. What are some examples of that in the field that you would see?
Yeah.
Someone might see.
One big thing is, just something as simple as a recall. We'll keep it simple. Okay. I want the dog to come with me because we're done with this portion of the field or we're done with this field in general, right? A lot of dogs understand that when you go to the truck, you may get swapped out, you may get put up, you may be done hunting, right? I don't care. When I ask you to come to me, you need to come to me, regardless of whatever else is going on. Now, we'll see a dog in a field, ask him to come to him. If they don't understand that the dog's birdie at that moment, the dog may be encountering bird odor, not so strong that he's dead up, locked up on point. But if he's acting birdie or he's showing interest in an area and I recall him and he never looks up at me, never acknowledges that I called him, I need to understand that dog may be so distracted by something that he may not have heard me. That's a high probability. I'm not going to correct the dog for ignoring me in that situation. The dog that I will correct is a dog that stops what he's doing, looks at me. I know that he clearly understands what I'm asking him to do, and then he turns around and says, "Yeah, no, right now." That's a dog I'll correct for. The other dog, I'll try to get his attention, whether it be closing the distance with him to make sure he heard me, toning his collar, whatever your recall command is, making sure he hears you and he understands what you're asking him to do. And then if he ignores you again, now we're going to correct. But if he's birdie, I'll go there and I'll let him investigate that to the fullest. Now, some dogs will understand that. You need to understand when your dog's in odor and when he's not in odor. Right?
Yeah.
That's pretty big. But that's on you as a handler of your dog. But that's, the dog that may be distracted, I'm not going to hammer him for that. Dog that misunderstands, say it's a windy day, okay? Talking about recall again. Yeah, I need you to come to me now. He may not have heard me. I always use hand signals with voice signals for that very reason. So, and you'll see that in some videos that I'll send you of dogs that I'll train in obedience. I'll always give him a verbal command with a physical command, a visual command that he can see. Because when he's a distance away from me, if he hears something and looks up at me, did that guy call me? And then he sees the hand signal, that means come to me. But that reiterates, his question. Okay. Yeah, he called me. Now there's no way that I can get away with ignoring him now, because now I know the dog's. Even if he hasn't heard me, he's seen me and he understands what that means. Only once he understands what it means. But you've got to make sure that he is understanding what you're asking him before you correct it. Correct for blatant disobedience, not for misunderstanding.
And I'm guessing as good and as obedient as most of the really good hunting dogs are, even my dogs, there still comes that particular day for whatever reason that they blow you off for some reason. I don't know what but it's going to happen to all of us, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's when you just have to say, I'm in charge, not you. So, but when that happens, that's just kind of part of the. I mean, you hope it doesn't happen very often, but
Mhm.
I know my old guy. He typically hunted hard and did everything I asked him to do. But there would come a time every so often, once in a while, like you said, you would ask him to come to the truck or whatever, and he decided to make another pass. And that's
Yeah.
not quite ready to come to the
Mhm.
truck yet, and a lot of times he'd find a bird, in that last pass, so I couldn't really hold that against him.
Right.
But when that happens to you, it's not the end of the world. It happens to everybody,
Sure.
and a lot of that probably does depend on the dog and how strong the foundation is that you've built with that dog.
Yeah.
But it's got they as a old trainer told me one time, they are dogs after all, so
Yeah.
they are dogs after all.
Especially with the military dogs, they're working every day to outsmart you. Every single day. I've got a lot of things to do when I show up to work. I've got to shoot, move, communicate. I've got a ton of paperwork to do, and I've got to train this dog. When we're not working together, he's sitting in a kennel or a crate just thinking of how he can induce a bite, the ability, the chance to bite. That's their whole world, man, and they're intelligent dogs, so they're pretty good at it. I've got a I've got a young beagle hound right now. I've always had beagle hounds for rabbit hunting, and I probably always will. It's something I enjoyed doing with my grandpa as a kid, so it's got a lot of sentimental value to me. But normally very rarely do you hunt with one hound dog. You always have a couple of them. I've got two now, and they're both good dogs, but one's a little more honest than the other one is. And when I tell them to come to me, he's learned that I never call him off of a rabbit track. If he's running a rabbit, even if I'm ready to go, I'll let him either run that rabbit to ground, run it to where I can shoot him, or lose the rabbit before I call him. So when I call him, one dog will always come, and one dog starts barking all of a sudden. And I know he's not chasing a rabbit, because if he was, the one who didn't lie would be there chasing it with him. So that's just another example of how smart these dogs are. You think of a beagle not particularly being an intelligent animal, but they're slick dogs. They all are.
Always trying to see how they can beat the system, huh?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, that's part of the challenge, I think, too. But
Yeah.
I do think it's a lot of people, tend to get hung up in dogs think like we think, and I think that's a big misstep right there. If you can, I think that was some of the important things we've been discussing is you got to learn to, how dogs think, and they don't think like we do. And
Right.
even though we treat them like family, and we treat them, like we do other members of our family, they when you're in that training aspect, they're learning differently. And I think one of the things I thought was interesting is how the inflection of your voice, how big that is. I mean, that is like, you're not thinking about that as much. You're mad, you're upset, you're frustrated, and and that dog right away is, picking up on that, and you just don't think about it.
They don't understand what pitch tone, the role that pitch tone and inflection in your voice plays when communicating. If you listen, and I always go back to wild animals, because that's where dogs came from, right? Wolves. They communicate through different pitches, tones, and inflections of their voice. That's how they communicate with one another, with body language, obviously, also. So that's exactly how I communicate with my dogs. Body language, pushing and pulling him, using an e-collar. Obviously, that's a whole nother discussion we can have. But one of the huge things that people don't understand when it comes to both these military dogs that are trained to use their noses and these hunting dogs is how odor works. Productive areas of a field. They're very similar on the battlefield and in the hunting field, right? Again, understanding odor theory and how odor works is very important. A few things that you can understand and you can do research on is odor is heavier than air. It'll always fall. It's sticky. It clings to things. When it's hot, the molecules spread out just like air would or a gas. When it's cold, it kind of clumps up together. So things like that in a field. I'll always start my dog on the downwind side of a field in a low area because that's where odor is going to be pooling. Um, so any birds in that field, he'll be able to backtrack if you put him in a productive area. Again, fence lines, windrows, ditches, things like that. Great productive areas to put your dog in. And a dog who understands productive areas is going to start seeking those areas out on the field on his own. But understanding how odor works is huge because you could have a beautiful food plot up there on the hill, right? Or they have birds, but you don't understand why your dog is down in this bowl in this field or downwind of the food plot where odor has been pushed to and pulling all day. Well, he's going to hit the bird over there. He'll start acting birdy. You want him to come up there with you, let him work it out, and always trust your dog's nose. Always. He's going to be right. There could be a bird there. Go in and investigate with him and trust your dog's nose. I learned that, obviously. I'm not going to blow a dog off whenever he's telling me there's a bomb there. I may do it if there's a bird there and sleep better at night, but I'll never do it with a bomb dog. So that really ingrained in me to trust your dog's nose, trust his changes in behavior.
More than likely, and the times that I haven't, I've been burned, and I learned. We all have learned that probably over our course of our careers hunting. I certainly have, and and learning that the wind and the type of conditions, it makes a big difference with hunting dogs. Obviously, bomb dogs, but hunting dogs specifically, which is where our experience is. But just the environmental conditions of before you get to the field, knowing what kind of weather you're going to be dealing with, whether, like you said, it's cold, it's hot, it's dry, it's windy, there's no wind. Whether you're going to be hunting more than one dog, those kinds of things. So
another huge thing is those beeping collars that people are using. If you haven't exposed the dog to that, you don't want to just throw one on them and say good luck. The dog will be completely distracted by that phenomenon going on his neck. A lot of things. We've got to think like the dog thinks instead of thinking the dog thinks like we think. If you keep that true to yourself, then you'll have a lot more success than people who don't.
Now, when it comes, I know you get a lot of dogs in that you're working with. Some have had poor management, I'll say. Some have had some issues that have been man created, and obviously sometimes some of the issues are easier undone than others. But what kind of challenge does that present to somebody where a dog has some kind of issue, which in the training, a step that didn't go the way it should, and then you as a person now are trying to unravel that and fix that? Is there a process to that too, where you have to kind of figure out, okay, where did this go wrong to start with?
Yeah, there's going to be a process with every one of those things that you're kind of alluding to, and the process will be a little different for all of them. The one thing that I've got to have out of a dog that I agree to train is drive. If he's got prey drive or hunt drive, we can overcome a lot of obstacles, right? Because we've got to revert back to his desire for something. Again, a bargaining chip in training to use. I need him to desire something, right? And not to go lay on a sofa all day. That's not the desire that I'm talking about. Desire for a bird or a ball or a treat or a food even, that can help and aid in training, but a desire for something and a bargaining chip for training. And once I decipher what that bargaining chip is, and sometimes I have to create that bargaining chip, and that takes a lot more time to properly expose the dog to something that he's going to fall in love with. Once I have that bargaining chip, now we're going to start revisiting those areas of failure on this dog, right? So if it's gunfire, one big thing for gunfire is, again, we'll go back to food. I'll withhold food from that dog and let him know that whenever I come to feed him, we're going to start making noises. It'll always be noises. It may not necessarily be gunfire, but there are different decibels and noise travels different speeds to the dog. So different noises can kind of help in that successive approximation to gunfire as the end result, right? So it could just be when he smells the gunpowder, that's something that triggers that response in the dog because he pairs that with that loud noise that scared him or he sees a gun and he cowers. So we're not going to jump into just gunfire with him. We're going to use some other things to work our way around it and bridge that gap that he had that negative experience with in a positive way. And a lot of it is the dog trusting you. You need to always set that dog up for success. Once he understands that anytime he comes with me, it'll be fun. He'll be successful. He starts to trust me as, again, a catalyst to a good thing. And then that good thing is whatever I choose to tell him it's going to be once you have that trust out of him. And then that good thing becomes whatever he was having an issue with. And it's always a challenge. Every dog's different. But again, that's where guys like Pat and Olin, who are animal behavioralists, really make their money. And where I learn from them is understanding this dog's behavior is paramount to everything. And it's gonna aid in your ability to take a week on this dog or 2 months on this dog. You know, if you get it right the first time in the beginning, you'll have much more success getting this dog to trust you and realize that you're a bridge to overcoming the negative aspects of what he's encountered in his training or in his hunting career.
I've had people talk about my dog's hard-headed. You know, you heard people say that my dog's hard-headed, or my dog is, sensitive or soft, but that goes back to, I mean, some dogs may be a little more, maybe the male versus the female. You know, the male may be a little more stiff as far as training goes. Maybe might try to push you a little more or challenge you a little more. But what happens with that? Is that kind of is that a term that kind of comes from people who maybe quite don't understand how the dog's thinking, and kind of perceive that as hard-headedness, that dog being hard-headed when it might just be the dog doesn't understand and is trying to, show you that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you talk about the trained retrievers force fetch, for instance. I got a dog who the guy, he told me, he said, man, I can't get this dog to open his mouth. He's so hard-headed, he just won't do it, I said, okay, well, we'll see. I'll take him. I'll work with him and see what we can do. And I really think people are more hard-headed than animals. Animals, by nature, can't afford to be hard-headed. They are doing what they have to do to survive. And this dog was no different. The dog had an issue with his tooth. And he didn't want the guy shoving his hand in there and shoving objects in there. And the guy was too ignorant to see the abscess on the dog's gum line, where his tooth was giving him some real issues. So the dog was uncomfortable. I wouldn't want to be dealing with the trained retrieve either, before I got my mouth fixed. So there are always little things like that. And that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes the dog has just learned because he rewarded him at the wrong time. He rewarded him for doing the opposite of what he wanted him to do. Case in point, the dog opens his mouth, the pressure should go away. Not the dog opens his mouth and then closes and bites down on something, the pressure goes away. You're teaching the dog at that point to bear down on something and the pressure goes away. Well, a smart dog will just start bearing down the second you start applying pressure without even opening his mouth. I've seen that a lot of times in training. Timing is everything. Mike Suttles is a phenomenal trainer who brought a flock of chickens to us at the kennels at Fifth Group, and we practiced training chickens with a clicker and food. Chicken is very fast. His movements are very fast, and we recorded all the training so we could play back, when we taught this chicken to peck a poker chip. Right? We had to click and reward for the action that we wanted the chicken to do. We wanted him to peck it. Very simple. You click when he pecks the poker chip, not before, not after. Because if you're bad in your timing, you'll get a chicken who starts to peck and then looks at you because you've clicked so many times when he's on his way to the poker chip. Or a chicken who pecks it, comes up, and then looks at you for the reward. You want a chicken who just hammers that poker chip like a jackhammer because you've taught him that beak on poker chip is a good thing. Click, that's when you get your reward. So timing is everything with e-collar training and with pressure, any type of pressure training, timing is everything.
And the dog you mentioned that learns to bite, that thinks that that's what you're asking me to do, is also then the dog that becomes a hard mouth is crunching birds, right? I mean,
hard mouth dog is nothing more than a poorly trained dog when it comes to retrieving. Again, when I introduce the force fetch or the trained retrieve, whatever you want to call it, it's always done with my hand first, my fingers, my hands in that dog's mouth. And I don't use a glove Because if you're using a glove, then you're rewarding the dog for the wrong thing. You don't want a dog who bears down on you. You want a dog, and you'll know that because your hand's pretty sensitive and it's in his mouth. So little things like that that I've picked up on in training are really beneficial. And timing is everything. Rewarding for what you want, as opposed to timing comes in huge to that. Again, rewarding for what you want is paramount when you're doing that type of training.
I mean, I could continue to talk with you for hours and hours on dog training, because it's such it's a great topic. It's an interesting topic, and it's one that anyone with a gun dog or even a personal dog, has experienced the training aspect, trying to get it, think like the dog's thinking, getting the dog to do the things you want it to do. And there's real science about that. And it's always fun talking to somebody like you that's got that experience from all the years that you've been dealing with the military side and the gun dog side to find out some of those techniques and tips to do. And so, as a part of what we're doing and having you here on the podcast, and again, we certainly appreciate you coming on and sharing all this information with us. But you're going to talk about some other, we could go on about collar conditioning and all kinds of other aspects, directional instruction and all kinds of things, which I think are really, really cool, and our viewers would really love to hear about. And so we're going to have you back. We'll probably, what we should do, and with your approval, is to have you back periodically to kind of maybe do one of those topics, if you would. Maybe next time we have you on, we're just specifically just focusing on collar conditioning or some other aspect. I think that would be really, really great. And
Sure.
But we do appreciate you having you on. The last 2 hours we've spent with you have been great. But as you know, I've spent hours over a beer talking to you about this very thing, and kind of gleaning that information. As you mentioned, the best way is to talk to people that have been down that road before. You mentioned a couple trainers that were mentors to you that you learned a lot from, and it's the same way. There's always somebody that's had that experience, and if you're confused or you don't know, find one of those guys and reach out to them, because
Yeah.
one of the difficult things is admitting that, hey, maybe I screwed this up or I didn't do it right. Nobody wants to admit that they're a lousy dog trainer, but the reality is, most of, I would say, 99% of the people that are in the dog world, training world, want your dog to succeed as much as my dog, so they're very, very, very easy to get to share the information with you, because they want you to be successful as well. And more so for that dog, that high dollar dog, or that professional, well-bred dog that should be, tearing it up out there in the field in the uplands, but there's a couple pieces that need to be put into place. But so my advice, and I'm assuming yours would be too, is to lean on somebody and ask lots of questions, and there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of stuff to read, a lot of articles. I know you even have some out there that you've put together on different training things. And so, but what we're going to do is have you back for some more of these episodes as we go forward, and we'll see what the issue is. But we do have a dog that we've talked about, Ruthie. We have a young setter, and we're kind of going through some of the basic things that we've talked about today. And we're going to kind of do some drills that you have suggested to us, and we're going to talk about, Ruthie's progress as we go through some of the future podcasts that we do, and we'll let you know how things are progressing. And in the meantime, you are going to probably do some short little videos, and for everybody that's watching and listening, we'll be putting those videos up on our Setter Tales podcast page. And I think the first one we're going to talk about is some collar conditioning. You've got a dog that's coming in here, and you're going to do a little small segment on how that dog's progressing and what you're looking for, and because there is really an art to that. I mean, unfortunately, people strap a collar on and go, hey, I hit this button and see what kind of result I get, and as with gunfire, that's a big there's a lot that goes into the collar conditioning side too.
Right. Yeah. Collar and conditioning is used. It's a great tool. It's not something I would ever not use with any dog that I have, whether it's my house pet, my gun dog, my personal protection dog. It's just a great tool to use. It's a communicatory device. It really is. It's how we communicate with the dog. So yeah, I've got a friend of mine that's got a pet obedience company that I do some training with to help him out with extra dogs that he's got, and I've got a new dog coming in, so I'll start from ground zero and kind of show you how I e-collar condition a dog, what I've learned are the best ways, and again, it's all timing and being able to read the dog
And
behavior.
so if anybody's out there that's been listening to the podcast, I know you're going to have questions, and if you do, on the Facebook page for the podcast, you could submit a question if you have it for Ian, and Ian will be monitoring that from time to time, or we'll let him know that hey, there's a couple viewers have some questions, and you'll go on there and try to answer some of the questions that people may have, and that'll be great. I mean, I think it'll really be helpful to everybody. So we're going to wrap it up for this session, but we usually like to end each one of the podcasts we do with our guests to ask them a favorite dog story. Okay. Now, everybody's got one. It could be back when you were in Louisiana, back in the days when you were growing up. It could have been one that happened last week. But there's always a dog or a particular thing that happened in the field that comes to mind when somebody says, what's a dog story? You're sitting around the campfire and everybody's telling stories about what their dog did or didn't do. There's probably one that you like to share. I'll tell a real quick one myself because it did involve you, but you were in Iowa attending an Aiming for the Cure event, which was a charity hunt. You were a celebrity, if I recall. And we were guiding for that hunt, and we actually had you in the field one afternoon. And the pheasants it's usually a late spring hunt, so the conditions typically can get warm. And as you know, the birds were running because pheasants like to run. They'd rather run than fly most days. And so the birds were really running and moving on us. And a particular bird we were tracking, and you were hunting with one of our dogs, Sweet Adeline. And Adeline was tracking, and she's got a great nose. And a rooster got up at some distance, I will say. And this is where I knew you had been a duck hunter at one time, because when I see guys make shots like that, they're usually waterfowl guys, or they're guys that are used to making, shooting long distances away. But anyway, you dropped this rooster, and he had a head start on us. And if you recall, the rooster went over the hill, and Adeline went over the hill, and some time passed because you and I were standing there thinking, well, we're gonna, gosh, I hope we get this bird for Ian, but I don't know. That bird had a heck of a head start, and as what seemed to be minutes, which I'm sure was only seconds, went by, and nothing's happened, and if you recall, pretty soon, cresting the hill was Adeline with your rooster, and I have a great picture of you with her and that rooster. But that's a fun story that I think about when I think about you and some of the hunting things that we've done, and so there's got to be one that you have. So what's your favorite story that comes to mind?
What's crazy, man, is with all of the scenarios that have played out in my life between gun dogs and hunting dogs, upland bird dogs, labs, beagles, and then overseas, the stuff that I've gotten to do with these military working dogs. I kind of always go back to the one story that kicked everything off for me with dogs in general, and kind of just started the love that I have and the passion that I have for working with them. As a kid in South Louisiana, we're surrounded by swamps, and I feel so terrible for this dog to this day, but it was a rough collie, so a lassie dog, right? And down there in that heat with all that hair, but that was my pet dog, the very first dog. And I was probably 7 years old when this incident occurred, but he followed me everywhere, man. And there was a day that we were out there pretty close to the edge of the swamp, and this dog he was a loving dog. He was a great pet, a very affectionate, loyal dog. Never had bit me ever. And I'm walking, and as we did back then, it was always hot. Never wore a shirt, never wore shoes. The dog bites me on the lower back. I turned around and what the heck was that about? This is a dog that I've only ever loved, and he's only ever loved me. So I turn around, and he bites me again immediately, right on the lower back. So I turn around and I'm looking at him, and I'm wondering. Now I'm kind of getting a little scared because this dog has bitten me twice. So I turn around the third time, and he grabs my pants and pulls me, right? And these dogs have kind of long snouts.
Right.
They're very unique in appearance. What I hadn't seen was there was a copperhead that was shedding, and when they do that, they're pretty. They just strike out at whatever it is that they can't be. And I didn't see the snake, and I didn't even know it was there, and it was steps away from being stepped on by me, so the dog knew it was there. And I mean, as crazy as it sounds, the dog, grabbed me and made sure that I wasn't going to step on the snake. Once he pulled me away, he went in between me and the snake. It kind of pushed me with his body. And they're herding dogs by nature, but this dog had never done any of that before. And that, once I realized exactly what had happened at a young age, even still, it struck me at how incredible dogs were. And I kind of made a determination at that very young age to always do what I could to work with dogs and help dogs the way that dog had helped me that day. And I've got some crazy stories with dogs, and I know you've heard a few of them, but to this day, man, that's always my favorite one that I tell my kids.
Yeah.
When I'm introducing a new pet to them, that's a story that always comes up. Dogs are loyal, they're loving, and they're intelligent. So trust them.
Trust that dog.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, it's been great spending this last 2 hours with you in episode 1 and 2, and we'll have you back. I think we have to have you back because I've got a lot more questions that I have, and I'm sure the viewers do too. So, again, thank you so much for your service, what you've done for the country, and hopefully we'll get you in the field soon, and we'll get to hunt behind some of your dogs.
Sounds great, man. It's been fun. I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Take care.